The dying ember's reflection danced in Willow Parker's tear-filled eyes as she huddled against the blackened remnants of what had once been her life. Colorado Territory, 1874, had shown its cruelest face yet, leaving nothing but ash and sorrow in its wake. Her father's homestead, built with years of sweat and determination, now stood as little more than charred timber and painful memories. "Not much worth saving," she whispered to herself, clutching her mother's silver locket, the only possession she'd managed to salvage before the flames consumed everything. The summer breeze carried the acrid scent of burned wood, mingling with the sweet smell of wildflowers that seemed to mock her grief. The sound of approaching hoofbeats barely registered through her sobs. She didn't bother to look up, not caring if it was friend or foe. "What more could be taken from her, miss? You all right?" The voice was deep, tinged with concern. Willow raised her head slowly, blinking away tears to focus on the tall figure now dismounting a magnificent chestnut stallion. The setting sun silhouetted him dramatically broad shoulders, worn leather vest, and a Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Does it look like I'm all right?" she snapped, immediately regretting her harshness. It wasn't this stranger's fault that outlaws had raided her home while she was in town selling her father's handcrafted furniture. The man approached cautiously, removing his hat to reveal sun-streaked brown hair and eyes the color of whiskey. "Name's Samuel Holloway. I saw the smoke from a few miles back." He surveyed the destruction with a grim expression before his eyes settled back on her. "You still have a place to go." It wasn't a question but a statement so confident and assured that, for a split second, Willow almost believed him. "And where might that be, Mr. Holloway?" She pushed herself to her feet, suddenly aware of her soot-stained dress and disheveled appearance. "My father is dead. This cabin was all I had left." Samuel stepped closer, offering her a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "My ranch, the Double H. It's about 10 miles west of here. I need help with the house, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. You'd have your own room and fair wages." Willow stared at him, suspicious. Single women didn't just go off with strange men in the territories, no matter how desperate their circumstances. "Why would you offer that to someone you don't know?" A small, sad smile crossed his weathered face. "Because 8 years ago I was standing where you are now, lost everything in a fire. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most." He glanced at the darkening sky. "Night's coming. Whatever you decide, you shouldn't stay here." Willow looked back at the smoldering ruins of her home. The logical part of her knew he was right, she couldn't stay here, but pride ran deep. "I don't need charity, Mr. Holloway. It's not charity if you work for it." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a blanket, offering it to her. "And it's Samuel or Sam?" She hesitated before accepting the blanket. Willow Parker." "Well, Miss Parker, what'll it be? You can ride with me to the Double H, or I can escort you to town if you've got folks there." Willow thought of the small settlement of Pine Creek, where she knew almost everyone but belonged to no one. Her father had been her only family since her mother died of tuberculosis 3 years prior. "I have no one in town," she admitted, "but I have my own horse in the trees yonder." "I didn't keep her in the barn, thank God." Samuel nodded, a look of understanding crossing his features. "Smart thinking. Well then, grab whatever you need to take with you and we can head out. What if I decide I don't want to stay at your ranch after all?" Willow asked, chin lifting slightly in defiance. "Then I'll bring you back to town tomorrow, no questions asked." He extended his hand. "You have my word." Something in his steady gaze made Willow believe him. Maybe it was the lack of pity she saw there, just honest understanding from someone who had walked this painful path before. "Give me a moment," she said, turning toward a small copse of trees where her mare, Penny, was tethered. She gathered the few belongings she'd laid out: a change of clothes, her father's pocket watch, and a small pouch containing $23.16, everything she had to her name. As they rode away from the smoking ruins, Willow couldn't help but look back one last time. 22 years of memories reduced to ash and char. Her father's hearty laugh would never again echo through those walls. She would never again sit by the hearth he'd built stone by stone, listening to him tell tales of his youth back east. "It doesn't stop hurting," Samuel said quietly beside her, as if reading her thoughts. "But it does get easier to breathe." They rode in silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Willow studied her companion's profile when she thought he wasn't looking. There was a certain hardness to his jaw, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried too long. Yet something in his manner put her at ease, a quiet strength that asked for nothing but seemed capable of weathering any storm. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, breaking the silence. "Going on 6 years now. Started with just 10 acres and a sorry excuse for a cabin. Now I've got over 200 acres and 15 hands working for me." There was no boasting in his tone, just simple facts. "What do you raise?" "Cattle mainly, some horses." "Been breeding quarter horses for the last 3 years. He glanced at her. "You know much about ranching?" Willow shook her head. "My father was a carpenter and farmer. We grew enough to get by and he made furniture to sell in town. I know my way around vegetables and chickens, but that's about it." "That's more than most," he replied. "Out here, being handy with whatever comes your way is what keeps you alive." The moon rose higher, illuminating the trail and casting long shadows across the open grassland. In the distance, Willow could make out the silhouette of buildings against the night sky. "That's the Double H," Samuel said, following her gaze. "Not much to look at compared to some of the bigger spreads, but it's home." As they drew closer, Willow saw a large 2-story farmhouse with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a substantial barn. Lamplight glowed warmly from the windows, and smoke curled from the chimney. "I thought you said you needed help with the house," Willow remarked, confusion evident in her voice. "It looks like someone's already there." Samuel's expression softened. "That would be Mrs. Abernathy. She comes by 3 days a week to cook and clean, but she's getting on in years and her arthritis is bad. She can't manage the stairs anymore, and the place needs more attention than she can give it." Relief washed over Willow. The presence of another woman made the proposition far less scandalous than it had initially seemed. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, lifting a lantern high. "That you, boss?" "It's me, Frank," Samuel called back. "We've got a guest. Miss Parker will be staying with us for a while." Frank, a weathered man with a salt and pepper beard, tipped his hat to Willow. "Evening, miss. Shall I take your horse?" "Thank you," Willow said, dismounting carefully and handing over Penny's reins. "Her name is Penny. She likes apples if you have any." "We surely do, miss." "I'll make her comfortable for the night." Samuel led Willow toward the house, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "I know this isn't how you plan to spend your evening, Miss Parker, but I hope you'll find some comfort here tonight." Willow nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Holloway. I don't know what I would have done otherwise." "Sam," he corrected gently, "and you don't need to thank me. Anyone with a decent bone in their body would have done the same." But as Willow followed him into the warm glow of the house, she knew that wasn't true. The territories were filled with men who would have taken advantage of a woman alone and desperate. Whatever his reasons, Samuel Holloway was different. Mrs. Abernathy, a plump woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, fussed over Willow the moment they entered. She insisted on drawing a bath and laying out clean clothes that had belonged to Samuel's late sister. "Poor child, such a terrible thing to happen," she clucked, helping Willow wash the soot from her hair. "But you're safe now, and that's what matters. Mr. Holloway is a good man, the best I know." "How long have you worked for him?" Willow asked, sinking gratefully into the warm water. "Since he first bought this place. My Harold, God rest his soul, was friends with Sam's father back in Missouri. When Sam came out west after the war, Harold helped him get started. After Harold passed, Sam made sure I was taken care of." She smiled fondly. "He acts all gruff and businesslike, but that boy has a heart bigger than the whole territory." Later, clean and dressed in borrowed clothes, Willow sat at the kitchen table while Mrs. Abernathy served up a hearty stew with fresh bread. Samuel joined them after seeing to his own horse, his hair damp from washing up at the pump outside. "I've put Miss Parker in the blue room," Mrs. Abernathy informed him. "I'll stay tonight in the sewing room so she's not alone in the house with you men." Samuel nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy." "I appreciate that." The older woman patted his shoulder. "I know you do. That's why you're not like your father." A shadow crossed Samuel's face at the mention of his father, but it vanished so quickly Willow thought she might have imagined it. They ate mostly in silence, Willow too exhausted for conversation. When they finished, Samuel excused himself to check on the ranch hands while Mrs. Abernathy showed Willow to her room. The blue room was simply but comfortably furnished with a bed, dresser, washstand, and rocking chair by the window. Blue and white quilts adorned the bed, matching the curtains that framed the glass panes. This was Emily's room, Sam's sister, Mrs. Abernathy explained. She passed from scarlet fever about 4 years back. He keeps it just as she left it. Willow ran her fingers over the quilt. I don't want to intrude on sacred space. Nonsense, child. Emily would have been the first to offer her room to someone in need. She had a generous heart, just like her brother. Mrs. Abernathy squeezed Willow's hand. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to decide what comes next. Left alone, Willow moved to the window and looked out at the vast expanse of land under moonlight. Stars dotted the sky like diamonds on black velvet, indifferent to the human dramas playing out beneath them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, its cry haunting and lonely. For the first time since discovering her home in ruins, Willow allowed herself to fully feel the loss. She sank onto the edge of the bed and wept for her father, for the home they'd built together, for the future they'd planned that would never come to pass. She didn't hear the door open, but suddenly Samuel was there, offering a handkerchief and a glass of water. I'm sorry, she said, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable moment. I thought I was done crying. You never really finish, he said, setting the water on the nightstand. You just learn to do it in between getting on with living. He hesitated, then added, I heard you from the hallway. I wasn't spying, Willow nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you for the water. Would you like me to send Mrs. Abernathy up? No, I'll be all right. I just need sleep. Samuel nodded and moved toward the door. Good night, Miss Parker, Willow, she corrected, echoing his earlier sentiment. And thank you again, Sam. A small smile touched his lips. Good night, Willow. After he left, Willow changed into the nightgown Mrs. Abernathy had provided and climbed into bed. Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw flames consuming her home, heard the phantom screams that could have been hers had she been inside. Dawn found her sitting in the rocking chair, watching as the first pink streaks of light painted the eastern horizon. A new day in a new place, a temporary refuge that somehow felt safer than anywhere she'd been since her father's death 6 months ago. A soft knock at the door announced Mrs. Abernathy with a tray of coffee and toast. I thought you might be awake, the older woman said. Sometimes after shock, sleep is hard to come by. Thank you, Willow said, accepting the tray gratefully. Is Mr. Holloway, is Sam up yet? Been up since before first light, that one, already out with the men. Mrs. Abernathy settled herself on the edge of the bed. He said to tell you there's no rush this morning. Take your time getting your bearings. Willow sipped the hot coffee. He's been very kind. That's his nature, though he works hard to hide it sometimes. Mrs. Abernathy studied Willow thoughtfully. Are you planning to stay on and take the position? I don't know, Willow admitted. I should probably go to town, see if there's work there. I don't know the first thing about running a house this size. You'd learn quick enough. And it would be good for this place to have a young woman's touch again. The older woman rose. But no pressure, dear. Sam meant what he said about taking you to town if that's what you prefer. After breakfast, Willow changed into her own clothes, now washed and dried by Mrs. Abernathy, and ventured outside. The Double H was even more impressive in daylight, a prosperous operation with well-maintained buildings and healthy livestock. In the distance, she could see several men on horseback moving cattle from one pasture to another. She walked toward the barn, drawn by the familiar sounds and smells of animals. Inside, she found Penny contentedly munching hay alongside several other horses. She settled in nice, Frank said, emerging from a stall he was mucking out. Good temperament on that one. She was my father's before mine, Willow explained, stroking the mare's nose. He always had a way with animals. Frank nodded respectfully. Boss said what happened to your place. Real shame that. Wasn't the Barton gang, was it? Willow shrugged. I don't know who did it. I was in town selling father's furniture. When I came back, everything was already in flames. Bartons have been causing trouble all through this part of the territory, robbing, burning, terrorizing folks. Sheriff can't seem to catch them. Frank spat to the side. Boss has had run-ins with them before. What kind of run-ins? They tried rustling some of our cattle last spring. Boss and the boys drove them off, but not before Wade Barton swore he'd get even. Frank shook his head. Mean bunch, those Bartons, but don't you worry none. No one's fool enough to try anything at the Double H, not with the boss and all us hands around. Willow spent the morning exploring the ranch, keeping close to the main buildings. Around noon, she spotted Samuel riding in with 3 other men. Even from a distance, she could tell which rider was him, something in the way he sat his horse, confident and at ease. He dismounted in a fluid motion and handed his reins to one of the hands before striding toward the house. Halfway there, he spotted Willow on the porch and changed direction. "Morning," he called as he approached. "Though I reckon it's closer to afternoon now. Did you sleep at all?" "A little," she fibbed. "Your ranch is impressive. It's getting there." He removed his gloves, tucking them into his belt. "Mrs. Abernathy said you might be wanting to go into town instead of staying on." "I was considering it," Willow admitted. "I don't want to impose. It's not imposing if I invited you." He leaned against the porch railing. "But I understand if you'd rather not work for a stranger." Willow studied him for a moment. There was something about Samuel Holloway that inspired trust, despite her natural caution around men she didn't know. "If I stayed," she began tentatively, "what exactly would my duties be? Cooking, cleaning, mending, keeping the house in order?" "Mrs. Abernathy would still come by to help with the heavier work, but she can't manage it all anymore." He named a monthly wage that was more than fair. "Plus room and board, of course. Sundays would be your own, and living arrangements. Your room would be the one you stayed in last night. I'm across the hall and the hands stay in the bunkhouse out back." He met her eyes directly. "You'd be treated with respect, Miss Parker. I run a decent outfit." Willow considered her options. She had enough money saved to perhaps rent a room in town for a few months, but work for a single woman was scarce and often poorly paid. The Double H offered not just employment but a place to belong, however temporarily. "I'll stay," she decided. "At least for a while, until I figure out what comes next." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes seemed to lighten. "Good, we could use the help." Over the next few weeks, Willow settled into life at the Double H. The work was hard but satisfying, much like her life with her father had been, though on a larger scale. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for Samuel and the hands, spent her days cleaning, baking, mending, and tending to the kitchen garden. Mrs. Abernathy had started, then served dinner before finally retiring to her room. Samuel was often gone from sunup to sundown, working alongside his men rather than just directing them. When their paths did cross, their conversations were pleasant but brief about household matters or ranch business, never anything personal. Yet sometimes Willow would catch him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unreadable. And sometimes she found herself watching him too, the way he spoke gently to frightened horses, how he listened attentively when his men brought problems to him, the rare smile that transformed his serious face when something amused him. One evening in late August, a violent thunderstorm rolled in just as dinner was ending. Lightning split the sky, followed by crashes of thunder that rattled the windows. The hands hurried to the bunkhouse while Samuel went to check on the horses in the barn. He hadn't returned when the rain began to fall in sheets. Worried, Willow grabbed a lantern and an oilskin coat from the hook by the door and ran toward the barn. Inside, she found Samuel calming a nervous colt, speaking in low, soothing tones as thunder boomed overhead. The other horses shifted restlessly in their stalls but seemed less agitated. "They don't like the thunder," he explained when he noticed her. "Especially the young ones." Willow set down the lantern and approached slowly. "My father used to sing to our horses during storms." Said the sound gave them something else to focus on. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "You suggesting I sing to them?" "No," Willow laughed. "I'm offering to do it myself." Without waiting for permission, she began to sing an old lullaby her mother had taught her. Her voice was clear and sweet, rising above the storm's fury. One by one, the horses grew calmer, their nervous shuffling subsiding. Samuel watched her, something like wonder in his expression. When she finished, the silence between them felt charged with more than just the electricity in the air. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. Willow felt her cheeks warm. "Mother always said music soothes all creatures. Seems she was right." A particularly loud crack of thunder made them both jump, and suddenly they were laughing, the tension broken by shared surprise. "We should get back to the house," Samuel said, checking that all the stall doors were secure. "This storm isn't letting up anytime soon." They made a dash for it, the rain soaking them despite the oilskin coats Samuel insisted Willow wear. By the time they reached the porch, they were both drenched and breathless. Inside, Willow lit lamps while Samuel built up the fire in the hearth. "You should change into dry clothes," he told her. "I'll make coffee." When she returned downstairs in a simple cotton dress, her damp hair braided over one shoulder, she found Samuel standing by the window watching the storm, a steaming cup in his hand. He'd changed, too, into a clean shirt and trousers, his feet bare on the wooden floor. It struck her then how intimate this moment was, just the two of them in the warm glow of lamplight, rain lashing the windows, the rest of the world shut away by darkness and storm. He turned as she approached, offering a second cup of coffee. "Storms moving east, should pass by morning." "Thank you," she said, taking the cup. Their fingers brushed, and she felt a jolt that had nothing to do with the lightning outside. They sat before the fire, the silence between them comfortable now rather than awkward. Willow studied his profile, wondering about the man behind the ranch owner, the employer who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured. Samuel glanced at her, surprised. "You can ask, I might not answer." "Fair enough." She hesitated, then plunged ahead. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned your father. She said you're not like him. What did she mean by that?" Samuel's expression darkened, and for a moment Willow thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, setting his coffee aside. "My father was not a good man," he said finally. "He drank, he had a temper. My mother and sister and I bore the brunt of it." His jaw tightened. "After my mother died, or rather, after he beat her to death, I took Emily and ran. I was 17, she was 12. Willow's hand flew to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. We made it to my uncle's place in Missouri. He took us in, taught me ranching." Samuel stared into the fire. "When the war came, I enlisted. Thought I might die, but at least Emily would be safe with my uncle and his wife." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Instead, I survived 4 years of hell only to come home and find Emily married off to a man twice her age." "What happened?" I confronted my uncle. He claimed it was a good match, that the man was wealthy and respected. I knew better. I'd seen how he looked at Emily when she was just a child. Samuel's knuckles whitened as he clenched his fist. "I took her away that night. We came west, as far from them all as we could get. And your father, last I heard, he drank himself to death in some saloon in St. Louis." Samuel's voice held no emotion. "Can't say I mourned him." "And Emily died of scarlet fever," Willow said softly, remembering what Mrs. Abernathy had told her. Samuel nodded. 4 years ago, she was 24, never got to really live." He looked at Willow then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "So when Mrs. Abernathy says I'm not like my father, she means I don't drink. I don't raise my hand in anger, and I try to help people instead of hurting them." Willow reached out impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "She's right. You are a good man, Samuel Holloway." He looked down at their joined hands, then slowly turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. "Not always, but I try to be." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with unspoken feelings. Then Samuel gently withdrew his hand and stood. "It's late," he said. "We should both get some sleep." Willow nodded, understanding his retreat. They were employer and employee, nothing more. It wouldn't be proper to acknowledge whatever was growing between them. "Good night, Sam," she said, rising as well. "Good night, Willow." As August gave way to September, life at the Double H fell into a comfortable rhythm. Willow took pride in transforming the house from merely functional to truly welcoming. She sewed new curtains for the parlor, arranged wildflowers in mason jars throughout the house, and baked pies that had the ranch hands fighting over the last slice. Samuel seemed to find more reasons to be around the house, checking the roof for leaks that didn't exist, fixing floorboards that weren't loose, building shelves in the pantry that Willow hadn't asked for but gratefully filled. Mrs. Abernathy noticed, of course. "That boy hasn't spent this much time indoors since Emily was alive," she observed one afternoon as they kneaded bread dough side by side. "Used to be he'd rather sleep in the barn than come inside before dark." Willow kept her eyes on her work, hoping her flushed cheeks would be attributed to the heat from the oven. "He's just being attentive to his property." "MMHMM," Mrs. Abernathy hummed knowingly. "And I suppose that's why he shaved twice yesterday when you mentioned you were going to town with him." "Mrs. Abernathy," Willow exclaimed, mortified. The older woman laughed. "Child, I've known that boy for years. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you when you're not watching, and I've seen how you look back." Willow couldn't deny it, not to herself anyway. She had developed feelings for Samuel that went far beyond gratitude or respect, but she was his employee, dependent on his goodwill for her livelihood. Acting on such feelings would be foolish at best, disastrous at worst. Even if that were true, she said carefully, it wouldn't be appropriate. "I work for him. Arrangements can change," Mrs. Abernathy replied cryptically, then changed the subject. The next day, Samuel asked Willow to accompany him to town for supplies. It wasn't the first time she often went along to select household items, but something felt different about this invitation. "I thought we might stay for supper at the hotel," he said as they loaded the wagon. "They've got a new cook from New Orleans. Frank says the food is worth the trip." It sounded suspiciously like a social outing rather than a business errand. Willow hesitated only briefly before agreeing. The ride to Pine Creek took just over an hour. Samuel was more talkative than usual, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about the early days of his ranch. Willow found herself laughing at his dry humor, enjoying this more relaxed version of the usually serious rancher. In town, they split up to complete their errands more efficiently, agreeing to meet at the general store in 2 hours. Willow visited the dressmaker first, ordering fabric for new kitchen towels, then stopped at the apothecary for Mrs. Abernathy's rheumatism remedy. She was just leaving the shop when a voice called her name. Turning, she saw Mrs. Bennet, the widow who ran the town's small boarding house. "Willow Parker, I thought that was you," the older woman said, approaching with a sympathetic expression. "I heard about your father's place, such a terrible thing. Are you staying in town now?" "No, I've taken a position at the Double H Ranch," Willow explained. "Mr. Holloway needed household help." Mrs. Bennet's eyebrows rose. "Samuel Holloway, well, that's interesting." She lowered her voice. "You be careful out there, dear. He keeps to himself too much. People talk." "People always talk," Willow replied evenly. "Mr. Holloway has been nothing but respectful and kind." "I'm sure he has." Mrs. Bennet patted her arm. "But a young woman alone with a man of uncertain background, you understand my concern." "His background isn't uncertain to me," Willow said, a protective edge entering her voice. "And I'm hardly alone with him. There are ranch hands all around, and Mrs. Abernathy comes regularly." "Well, that's something, I suppose." Mrs. Bennet looked unconvinced. "Just remember you always have a place at my boarding house if things don't work out." Willow thanked her politely but firmly ended the conversation. She'd heard whispers about Samuel in town before rumors that he'd been a gunslinger, or worse, before settling in Colorado territory. She dismissed them as idle gossip, and nothing in Samuel's behavior had ever given her reason to fear him. Still, Mrs. Bennet's comments left her unsettled as she made her way to the general store. Samuel was already there, loading sacks of flour and sugar into the wagon. "Everything all right?" he asked, noticing her expression. "You look troubled." Willow hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I ran into Mrs. Bennet. She seemed concerned about my working at the Double H." Samuel's face hardened. "Ah, town gossip. She mentioned your uncertain background," Willow admitted. "I told her she was mistaken." "Were you?" His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "There are parts of my past I haven't shared, Willow." She met his gaze steadily. "We all have parts of our past we keep private. I judge people by how they treat others, not by rumors or things they may have done before I knew them." Something in Samuel's expression softened. "That's a rare quality, not so rare, just common sense." Willow changed the subject. "Are we still having supper at the hotel, if you'd like to? Or we could head back to the ranch if you'd prefer." "I'd like to stay," she said firmly. "I hear they have a cook from New Orleans. Dinner at the hotel dining room proved to be everything Frank had promised." The food was excellent, spiced in ways Willow had never tasted before, and the atmosphere was almost elegant, at least by frontier standards. What made the evening truly special, though, was seeing Samuel relaxed and smiling. He told her stories of his early days in Colorado territory, of blizzards and cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the way. In turn, she shared memories of her childhood in Pennsylvania before her family moved west, of the apple orchards and snowy winters and the piano lessons her mother had insisted upon. "You play piano?" he asked, intrigued. "I used to. We couldn't bring our piano when we came west." Willow smiled at the memory. "Father always said he'd build me one someday, but there was never enough money or time." "There's a piano at the church in town," Samuel said. "I've seen it when Reverend Michaels holds services." "I doubt I remember much after all this time," Willow demurred. "Still, you should try it sometime. Music like you made in the barn that night, it would be a shame to let that gift go unused." By the time they started for home, the stars were out in full force, creating a canopy of light above the dark landscape. Willow found herself fighting to stay awake, lulled by the steady motion of the wagon and the warmth of the blanket Samuel had tucked around her. "You can sleep," he told her gently. "I'll wake you when we get home." Home, the word settled around her like a warm embrace. Somehow, in just a few short weeks, the Double H had become home in a way no place had been since her father died. She must have dozed off, because the next thing she knew, Samuel was gently shaking her shoulder. "Willow, we're here." Opening her eyes, she saw they were in front of the house, the porch lamp casting a golden glow onto the steps. "I'm sorry," she said, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you. No need to apologize, it's been a long day." He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. When her feet touched the ground, they were standing very close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, smell the clean scent of his soap. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "I enjoyed it. So did I." His voice was equally quiet, as if they were sharing a secret. "We should do it again sometime. I'd like that." Neither moved away. Willow's heart hammered in her chest as Samuel's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, questioning. A sudden noise from the bunkhouse laughter and the strum of a guitar broke the moment. Samuel stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should see to the horses," he said. "Good night, Willow." "Good night, Sam." Inside, Willow leaned against the closed door, her emotions in turmoil. She was falling in love with Samuel Holloway, had perhaps already fallen, and she suspected he felt something for her too. But the complications of their arrangement loomed large, an invisible barrier neither seemed ready to breach. The next few days brought an uncomfortable awareness of every glance, every accidental touch, every moment alone together. They were both careful, almost formal with each other, as if acknowledging what had nearly happened might somehow make it impossible to continue as they were. Relief came in the form of the fall cattle drive. Samuel would be gone for at least 2 weeks, taking most of the hands with him to move part of the herd to market in Denver. Only Frank and 2 other men would remain behind to look after the ranch. "Mrs. Abernathy will stay here while I'm gone," Samuel told Willow the night before his departure. "I don't want you alone with just the men, even though I trust Frank with my life." "I'll be fine," Willow assured him, "but thank you for considering my reputation." A shadow of something frustration crossed his face. "Your reputation is important. This territory isn't kind to women who disregard convention." "I know." Willow folded her hands in her lap. "My father taught me that much." Samuel leaned forward in his chair. "Willow, when I get back, yes," she prompted. When he fell silent, he shook his head. "Never mind. It can wait until I return." The 2 weeks of Samuel's absence stretched endlessly. Willow threw herself into work, deep cleaning every room in the house, baking enough to keep the remaining hands well fed, and even helping Frank with some of the lighter outdoor chores. Mrs. Abernathy watched her with knowing eyes but said little, seeming to understand Willow's need to stay busy. "He'll be back before you know it," was all she offered. "Samuel Holloway always keeps his word." On the afternoon Willow expected the cattle drive to return, she found herself checking the horizon more often than was reasonable. When she spotted a rider approaching from the east, her heart leapt only to plummet when she recognized not Samuel but the deputy sheriff from Pine Creek. "Afternoon, Miss Parker," Deputy Collins said, dismounting. "Is Frank around? Got some news he should hear." "He's in the barn," Willow replied, a sense of foreboding washing over her. "Is something wrong?" Deputy Collins removed his hat, revealing a troubled expression. "Best if I tell Frank first, madam." Frank emerged from the barn before Willow could press for more information. The two men spoke in low voices, Frank's expression growing increasingly grim. "What is it?" Willow called, unable to bear the suspense any longer. "Has something happened to the drive?" To Samuel, Frank and Collins exchanged a look before Frank approached her. "There was trouble on the trail, Miss Willow. Barton gang ambushed them near the mountain pass. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet." "Is he as Samuel? He's alive," Frank assured her quickly. "But he's hurt pretty bad. They got him to a doctor in Boulder. Rest of the boys are continuing on to Denver with the herd." "How bad?" Willow demanded. "Shot twice," Collins said. "Once in the shoulder, once in the side. Doctor says he'll live, but he's in no condition to travel yet." "I need to go to him," Willow said immediately. "How far is Boulder?" 2 days hard ride," Frank said. "But Miss Willow, it ain't proper for you to—" "I don't give a damn about proper," she snapped, shocking both men with her language. "He would come for any of us if we were hurt." "I won't leave him alone there." Mrs. Abernathy appeared on the porch, having overheard. "I'll go with her," she announced. "That will satisfy propriety. Frank, hitch up the wagon. We'll take bedding and food." No sense in Samuel paying hotel prices when we can manage well enough camping along the way. Frank knew better than to argue with both women. By late afternoon, the wagon was loaded with everything they might need, including medical supplies from Mrs. Abernathy's extensive collection of remedies. "The doctor's name is Wilson," Collins told them as they prepared to depart. "His office is on Pearl Street, can't miss it. Tell him Sheriff Blackwell sent you." The journey to Boulder was arduous, the roads rough and the nights cold. Willow drove while Mrs. Abernathy dozed beside her, then they traded places when Willow could no longer keep her eyes open. They reached Boulder late on the second day, exhausted but determined. Dr. Wilson's office was indeed easy to find, with a freshly painted sign hanging over a neat brick building on Pearl Street. The doctor himself, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, greeted them with surprise. "You've come all the way from Pine Creek. Mr. Holloway is a fortunate man to have such dedicated friends." The slight hesitation before friends wasn't lost on Willow, but she ignored it. "How is he?" "Recovering, but slowly. The shoulder wound was clean, bullet went straight through. The one in his side was more problematic. It nicked his liver, causing significant bleeding." "Doctor." Wilson rubbed his beard. "He's fighting infection now, which is always the greatest danger." "May we see him?" Mrs. Abernathy asked. "Of course, he's in the back room. We couldn't move him to the hotel yet." The doctor led them through the office to a small room furnished with a bed, nightstand, and single chair. "He's been in and out of consciousness. The fever makes him somewhat confused at times." Samuel lay pale and still against the white sheets, his usually strong form looking diminished. Bandages wrapped his left shoulder and disappeared beneath the blanket covering his torso. His breathing was labored, his face flushed with fever. Willow moved to his side immediately, laying a gentle hand on his forehead. "He's burning up. I've been giving him willow bark tea for the fever, doctor." Wilson said, "And keeping the wounds clean. Beyond that, it's up to his constitution and God's will." "We'll stay with him," Mrs. Abernathy declared. "I've nursed many a fever in my time. Between the two of us, we won't leave him alone for a minute." The doctor nodded, seeming relieved rather than offended by their takeover. "I have other patients to attend to. I'll check on him regularly, of course." Over the next 3 days, Willow and Mrs. Abernathy took turns sitting with Samuel, cooling his fevered body with damp cloths, spooning broth into his mouth when he was lucid enough to swallow, changing his bandages under Dr. Wilson's supervision. During his conscious moments, Samuel seemed surprised but grateful for their presence. During the worst of the fever, he called out sometimes for his sister, sometimes for his mother, and once, heart-wrenchingly, for Willow. "I'm here," she had whispered, holding his hand tightly. "I'm right here, Sam." On the fourth night, Willow was alone with him when his fever finally broke. She had been dozing in the chair beside his bed when a change in his breathing woke her. Opening her eyes, she found him watching her, his gaze clear for the first time since they'd arrived. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been. "Of course I came." She moved to sit on the edge of the bed, checking his forehead with the back of her hand. "Your fever's broken." "How long have I been here?" "A week, from what the doctor told us. We've been here 4 days." Samuel closed his eyes briefly. "The herd made it to market, according to the telegram that arrived yesterday. Your foreman handled everything." "Good." He opened his eyes again, studying her face. "You look tired." Willow smiled wryly. "You're one to talk." A weak chuckle escaped him, followed by a wince. "Don't make me laugh." "It hurts. Sorry." She reached for the water glass on the nightstand. Thirsty, he nodded, allowing her to help him drink. When he finished, he caught her hand before she could withdraw. "Thank you," he said simply. "For coming, for staying." "I couldn't not come," Willow admitted softly. "I was so afraid when we heard you were hurt." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "I thought of you," he confessed, "when I was lying there after they shot me. I thought I might die without telling you," he broke off, grimacing as pain interrupted his words. "Without telling me what?" Willow prompted gently. Samuel's grip on her hand tightened. "That I love you," he said quietly. "That I've loved you since that night in the storm when you sang to frightened horses and made me believe in beauty again." Tears filled Willow's eyes, spilling unchecked down her cheeks. "Samuel Holloway, if you weren't already injured, I would hit you right now." His eyebrows rose in surprise. "That's not the response I expected. You waited until you were shot and feverish to tell me." She was laughing and crying at once. "I've been in love with you for months, you stubborn man." The smile that spread across his face was worth every mile of their difficult journey. "Well," he said, "seems we've both been fools." "Complete fools," she agreed, leaning down to press her forehead against his. "Don't you ever scare me like this again. I'll do my best." He lifted his uninjured arm to touch her cheek. "Willow Parker, when I'm well enough to stand, I'm going to ask you properly to be my wife, but I'd like to know now if you might be inclined to say yes." "I might be," she teased, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. "Ask me again when you're standing and we'll see." It took 3 more weeks before Samuel was strong enough to return to the Double H. By then, word had spread throughout the region about the rancher and the woman who had rushed to his side. Mrs. Bennett and her ilk might have disapproved, but most folks saw it for what it was, a love story unfolding against the harsh backdrop of frontier life. On a crisp October morning, Samuel walked unaided onto the porch of his ranch house, took Willow's hands in his, and formally asked her to become his wife. Her yes echoed across the land that had brought them together, the land where, 6 months earlier, she had stood weeping beside the ashes of her past while he offered her a future. They were married by Reverend Michaels in the small church in Pine Creek, with Mrs. Abernathy weeping happily in the front pew, and all the ranch hands cleaned up and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. As a wedding gift, the town had tuned the old piano, and Willow played it after the ceremony, her fingers remembering what her mind had forgotten. Life at the Double H continued much as before, except that Willow was now mistress rather than employee, and Samuel found far more reasons to stay close to home. Together they built on the foundation he had started, turning a successful ranch into a true home. A year to the day after they met, they stood together on the site where Willow's father's cabin had once stood. The land had been purchased by Samuel as a surprise for his wife. "I thought we might build something here," he said, holding her close against the autumn chill. "Not to live in the ranch as our home, but a place to come when we want to remember. A memorial to your father." Willow leaned into his embrace, watching as golden leaves danced on the breeze where flames had once reached toward the sky. "I'd like that." As they rode home together, Willow's hand rested protectively over the gentle swell of her belly where their child grew a new life created from the ashes of loss and pain. "You still have a place to go." Samuel had told her that first day, when she had nothing left but grief and determination. What neither of them had known then was that the place he offered wasn't just a ranch or a job or even a home, it was a heart. It was a future, it was love, and it was more than enough.